Today is Saturday, January 29th. We're just days away from the start of the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, China. More than 200 athletes are representing Team USA in sports like figure skating, hockey, skiing, luge, and curling. But along with the excitement, there are also challenges, from political tensions to the pandemic. We're breaking it all down with two guests today. We'll be digging more into the politics of the games a bit later, but first, you'll hear from three-time Olympian Gordy Sheer, who won a silver medal in luge in 1998. He's now the director of marketing for Team USA's luge team. He shares what he remembers most about competing in the Olympics and explains what he thinks athletes have been robbed of in 2022. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Hi, Gordy. Thanks so much for coming on the Newsworthy.
Thanks, Erica. I appreciate you having me on.
So let's start with your own three-time Olympic experience. What stands out in your mind when you think back on those competitions?
First would be the opening ceremonies experience. As a kid, it's something that I had seen, the Parade of Nations is something that I'd seen and just aspired to being a part of since I was probably 4. It's just a moment that's all about realizing dreams. It's all about being a part of something bigger. It's about walking in behind the American flag, all that kind of stuff that you hear people talk about, but is actually true. And then probably the other big memory for me was actually being a part of an Olympic podium ceremony. I remember crossing the finish line being a huge deal in '98 when Chris Thorpe and I were fortunate enough to win a silver medal. I remember those feelings being pretty intense, but nothing ever tops that opening ceremonies.
How much of it is being part of Team USA, but also seeing all of the other countries that are part of this one thing?
Being a part of the opening ceremony is definitely a global experience, aside from being a national experience. It definitely expands your horizons being in sport. You're seeing other cultures, meeting other people from around the globe, and it's a wonderful experience.
The U.S. this year is not sending diplomats as part of a boycott because of China's human rights violations. What do you make of that?
What the U.S. government decides to do is their business. We are going to compete. And of course, we have our own personal feelings about different issues. But, at the end of the day, USA Luge or any of our athletes are not the ones who chose where these Olympics would take place.
Do you think that athletes themselves should play any part in the politics of it all?
That's an individual choice, honestly. The only thing that we tell our athletes is we hope that they make decisions that don't adversely affect their performance on race day. We're not suggesting that they should be robots and not have feelings, but like I said, we don't select where we race, and we want our athletes to be as ready and comfortable as possible on race day.
Of course, the other variable for Olympic athletes today is the pandemic. How has COVID impacted the luge team's preparations for Beijing?
COVID has impacted probably everything that USA Luge does, from the national and Olympic team on down to our recruiting events. It's just wreaked havoc on us as it has everybody else. For our elite level athletes, they're being constantly tested, doing everything to stay out of COVID's way, and really living pretty sheltered lives and, really sacrificing a whole lot in addition to the normal sacrifices that athletes make.
Yeah, that's got to take a mental toll in addition to the time and health and everything else that goes into it.
Going through an Olympic trials is an immense amount of pressure to begin with. And, throwing COVID and, the lack of social interaction between the athletes, they have single rooms. They're not socializing in the same way that they normally would to kind of blow off some steam. And it's just been so much stress with no relief.
So with no family and friends or fans in the stands or even in Beijing, what's the impact on the athletes from that perspective?
Well, I think with no family and friends in the stands, the athletes are being robbed of an experience. And it's a shame, because part of it is for the families and friends to watch their sons and daughters compete in these competitions. It's the payoff for the athletes, but it's also the payoff for the families. It's just a shame. And the sponsors too, who I'm putting on my marketing hat, but the sponsors who support those athletes, a lot of them have personal relationships and want to be there too. So it really is a bummer for everybody.
Do you think that they should be allowed despite concerns around the pandemic?
No, I do think, this is my opinion, but I think that keeping the athletes safe and preventing them from testing positive, if that's the goal of the Chinese organizing committee and government, then those are the rules we have to play by. At the end of the day, we want the athletes to have that ability to compete. As sad as it is that friends and family aren't there, it would be more disappointing for them not to compete at all.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that the public has about Olympics or Olympic athletes?
I think in a smaller sport like luge and Olympic sports in general, there's probably a sense among people that we kind of hibernate and then come out once every 4 years, when in reality, our athletes are going at it all fall and winter long on the World Cup and spending the spring and summer getting ready for that World Cup. And it's a full-time commitment, and it is their life.
Any final advice for Team USA's athletes or just final thoughts on the upcoming games?
The obvious advice is to, at some point during your competition, take a breath, look around and enjoy it. And I think the other piece of advice for our athletes is not to break routine. Routine was probably the one thing that kept me calm when I was an athlete. You get to the track and you have a checklist of things that you need to do before you get on that sled, and you do them, and that'll just calm your nerves right down.
Still ahead, we're diving deeper into the reasons for and potential impact of the U.S. diplomatic boycott. Our second guest is Jules Boykoff. He's also a former Olympic athlete. He played soccer for Team USA in 1990. But today, he's a professor of political science at Pacific University and the author of 4 books on the Olympics, including Power Games, A Political History of the Olympics. We're talking with him about the politics and critiques of the games you don't always see in the headlines. But first, let's take a quick break to thank our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by ZocDoc. There are some amazing doctors out there, but really the only ones that matter are the ones who actually take your insurance. With ZocDoc, you can focus on doctors who are in-network, putting you on the path to see the doctors who are right for you. ZocDoc is a free app that shows you doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. Go to ZocDoc.com, choose a time slot, and whether you want to see the doctor in person or do a video visit, and just like that, you're booked. No more wasting a bunch of time searching online, calling doctors' offices, or asking everyone you know for a recommendation. I've had that experience where I thought I got a great doctor recommendation only to find out they don't take my insurance and I was back at square one. With ZocDoc, I know all the options on the list are in-network. Go to ZocDoc.com/newsworthy and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then start your search for a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/newsworthy, ZocDoc.com/newsworthy. This episode is also brought to you by Seed. As part of my morning routine every day, I take 2 capsules of Seed's Daily Symbiotic. I take it on an empty stomach as they recommend, and I just love how they make me feel. So this is a pre- and probiotic 2-in-1 capsule. There are 24 clinically and scientifically studied strains, the first of its kind. It's for supporting gut health, skin health, it promotes heart health, and more. As someone who cares about my whole body health, I was looking for the best probiotic on the market a while back. I did quite a bit of research, and I actually found Seed before I even partnered with them. And now I'm excited Seed is a sponsor of the show because after taking the Daily Symbiotic for a while, I've noticed the benefits of this product on my health. I am truly impressed. In fact, I even got my husband to start taking these as well. And I love that you can now get a discount. You can get 15% off your first month's supply of Seed's Daily Symbiotic by visiting seed.com/newsworthy or by using the code newsworthy at checkout. Again, you can get 15% off your first month's supply of Seed's Daily Symbiotic by going to seed.com/newsworthy or use the code newsworthy at checkout. Okay, now to my conversation with Jules Boykoff. Hi, Jules. Thank you for coming on the Newsworthy.
My pleasure.
So before we really dive into it, let's first recap for our listeners how the location of the Olympics is chosen in the first place.
Voting members of the International Olympic Committee convene and decide which of the bids being put forth by various bid cities is the one that they want to go with. And back in 2015, when people were bidding on the 2022 Winter Olympics, there were numerous cities from around the world that were initially interested, from Oslo to Lviv, Ukraine, to Stockholm in Sweden. But they all dropped out of the bidding, leaving only Beijing as well as Almaty, Kazakhstan, neither of them exactly known as bastions of democracy. And the International Olympic Committee had two choices, and they went with Beijing, the entity that they knew, having hosted the 2008 Summer Olympics prior.
So what message is the U.S. hoping to send with a diplomatic boycott? And what does that really do? What does that mean?
Sure. So the United States decided not to send diplomats as a signal that it was not going to accept the extreme human rights abuses that are happening in China. In Xinjiang province, we have Uyghur Muslims and Turkic Muslims who are being treated extremely poorly, and not to mention the Tibetans as well as the Hong Kong democracy activists. And so this is meant to be a signal. It's also supposed to undermine the possibility that China can engage in what people are increasingly calling sports washing, using these sports mega events as a way to launder their reputations on the international stage. And so by kind of saying that we're not going to send diplomats there, it's supposed to undercut the possibility for China to engage in these sort of grin and grip photo sessions that are common with these mega events like the Olympics, that tend to lend a certain amount of legitimacy to the host city and host country.
Do you think these types of boycotts are effective?
Well, they are effective at raising the issue of human rights abuses in the country. Beyond that, I'm not really sure, at least the United States can say that we're standing by the principles.
The International Olympic Committee, the IOC, has said the Olympics is a time to unite the world and that it should not be about politics. I know you disagree with that, so explain why.
Well, one of the most pervasive myths around the Olympics is that the games are not political. And the International Olympic Committee is probably the biggest purveyor of this myth. The IOC's brand of apoliticism, though, I've been arguing for a long time now, is in fact deeply political. If we go back to history, we can think about the 1936 Summer Olympics, which were staged in Berlin, Germany, with full awareness that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were gaining power and using the Olympics against Jewish people by instituting an Aryans-only policy within German sports organizations. If you go forward to more recent times, the International Olympic Committee is taking credit for convincing political leaders from North and South Korea to create a unified hockey team to compete under one flag at the recent 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. So, when it comes to this issue, the International Olympic Committee is hypocritical. From behind its public relations lectern, it talks about how it doesn't want politics while simultaneously embracing politics in different ways. I guess you could say that the bottom line is that the International Olympic Committee, in my mind, as someone who's studied the organization for a long time, is not against politics. It's just against a certain type of politics. It's a nonprofit organization that is incredibly profitable. The International Olympic Committee brings billions of dollars into its coffers. And so I think we really can gain a lot of understanding about the Olympic movement, as they call themselves, and certainly the International Olympic Committee, if we start to think seriously about how money really affects what we see on our screens.
Where does that money go? What does it go toward?
Well, if you ask the International Olympic Committee, they would tell you that they defray that money around the world. They share it with different international federations of sport. And that's absolutely true. They do that. But they also spend it on themselves. I mean, if you are on the International Olympic Committee's executive board and you go to the Olympics, you can get a per diem of $900 per day. So in other words, that doesn't even count, by the way, all the food and free hotels and all the other perks that you get as an IOC member. You could actually make more money as an IOC member from just sitting there and watching the competition than many people who attend, participate, and win a medal at the Olympic Games. So, they talk about spending the money on all these different causes, but they certainly know how to spend it on themselves as well.
So let's talk a little bit about the athletes. They obviously don't control where the Olympics take place. And to be clear, the U.S. is not saying that American athletes cannot go to the Olympics. It's just the diplomats that are boycotting. As a former Olympic soccer player yourself, what do you think the role of an athlete should be in all this?
I think we're living in an incredibly powerful moment when it comes to athletes. I think we could even call it the athlete empowerment moment where we have athletes who are increasingly socially conscious, increasingly interested in the political world around them. And we've seen them speaking out, whether it's the Women's National Basketball Association or the NFL or Colin Kaepernick or Megan Rapinoe, down to local leagues and local high schools where students are getting more animated about what's going on in the world, and athletes too. And so what we're looking at now as we move into Beijing is a difficult situation for athletes who might like to express their political beliefs. We're not sure what's going to happen.
Any final thought?
Well, just that I would stress that there are so many positive stories around athletes in the Olympics, from athletes giving up their spot to other athletes so they can participate in the games, as happened recently with some speed skaters from the United States. But we need to try to embrace the complexity of the Olympic Games. On one hand, they're this incredibly powerful and beautiful sport juggernaut. On the other hand, we see money riding through the system. And I guess I would just say, as we move toward the Beijing Olympics, I think it's perfectly fine to support these wonderful athletes as they try to achieve their dreams, while at the same time being critical of the International Olympic Committee and the people that run the games. We need not devote ourselves to the death of complexity, and the Olympics are a wonderful chance to embrace complexity, support athletes, but also critique power when it needs to be critiqued.
So we wanted to get a response from the International Olympic Committee. They declined our request for an interview, but did send us an emailed statement instead. It says in part, quote, "The presence of government officials and diplomats is a purely political decision for each government. The IOC, in its political neutrality, respects this right of the governments and takes note of their decisions. At the same time, this announcement also makes clear that the Olympic Games and the participation of the athletes are beyond politics, and we welcome this." The Winter Olympics kick off on Friday, February 4th. We'll bring you the big highlights on our regular news roundups during the week, along with the rest of the day's news. So be sure to tune in to The Newsworthy every Monday through Friday for our regular 10-minute episodes. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend.